whatever you think is the best way for this country to generate electricity so that we can all live the style that we do, the lifestyle that we do. These are all made possible because we have power plants. I can't find a single justification why a utility should build its own power plants.
Utilities have little, if any, motivation to control cost or to control expansion of power plants, transmission lines, distribution systems, office buildings, whatever they can get away with.
We've been moving toward a more distributed generation, more independent power production, and in some places quite successfully. But as a result, I'm beginning to see some major pushback from the large investor-owned utilities, and they're taking action now to try to find ways to cut the knees out from under this startup industry.
What we have is something that a utility could not replicate on this scale or at this site or in this community. It's critical that they recognize that and provide these opportunities for us to exist.
The independent power producer is much better equipped to take on risk of new innovative technologies and develop power plants much faster than a regulated utility. I think you need to start looking at the bigger picture of act globally and act locally at the same time. You need to think about what your energy future is going to be for your grandchildren.
When you flip that switch, there's a line that comes into the building that you're standing in right now. Open the door. Go outside. Where does that line come in? Where does it go to? You know, start recognizing the infrastructure patterns in our lives.
That electricity is a necessity of life. You know, I really can fluctuate the number of times I go to the doctor, and I really can fluctuate the medication and the quality of my food. But I can't do without those kilowatt hours.
I think it's really important for just the everyday customer to understand what's behind their utility bill. And more so now than I think ever before. When you're looking at changing power supply to drive our economy, and particularly looking to move to a lower carbon supply, we're seeing very rapid changes in technology.
That electricity is not something that has to be controlled or owned by just one entity, but is open to thousands of different options, from renewables, the wind, the solar, the hydro, the biomass, to fossil fuels using natural gas in more efficient, smaller scale generation.
Independent power producers came about in part because of concerns that costs were starting to get out of control because of lack of competition. And that is, you had a single electric utility, and they decided generally what was going to be built, subject to approval by their state commission. But once they decided to do that, they went forward and it got built, and the customers paid for it. So then introduced the independent power producer, whose role then was to say, you know, power can be produced, power plants developed by people other than utilities, and if we get people to compete with one another, then maybe we can get that cost down.
We're more nimble, we're able to build our power plants much more readily than a regulated utility will be. Also, we usually can do it at a much lower cost. We provide alternative costs into the power market, and so the ratepayer benefits from having independent power being developed and sold into the marketplace because it keeps the overall rate structure lower.
Developing projects is really, I believe, a domain that is best suited to independent power producers. Van Sickle Ridge was the first project here in the inner Northwest. It really was a very risky proposition at the time, and independent power producers are exactly the type of entity to take on that kind of risk.
We've had a biomass energy plant here at SDS Lumber since 1978. It's not something that a utility can do. It's not something that a utility should do, really. It's a 10 megawatt biomass energy plant. and it uses all of the byproduct from the sawmilling, plywood manufacture, log chipping operations, and log handling to make electricity. We produce steam, superheated steam, and a part of that steam goes to drying our lumber or drying our veneer, and the remaining steam goes to the energy plant and is produced into electricity, goes out into the Northwest energy system.
In the pie of energy generation, you have many, many types, sources of power: sun, wind, coal, oil, gas, and hydro, right? And so to trade one off against the other belies the role of the rest of it in the overall grid.
If the wind isn't blowing, if the sun's not shining, if there's no water in this hydro system, what do? You need some type of resource, and that usually falls back to a fossil fuel type of resource. So you need something that turns on, and you need that to turn on for sure on a cold day in December. In the past, there was a lot of projects built with natural gas in what we call combined cycle, where you run gas through a gas turbine to generate electricity, and then you capture the heat from the gas turbine to make steam and run that through a steam turbine, which gives you a very high efficient means of burning a fuel to produce electricity in this case.
The entity that you want developing a power project is one that does it for a living. If that's not what you're doing all the time, you might miss gigantic things like an endangered species nearby.
There's a significant difference between this location and some of the other West Side wind resource locations that have been proposed. This location does not have any primary habitat for special status species such as the marble murrelet. Plus, this area has very, very strong, consistent winds, which gives it the potential to develop a lot of electrical power.
People want clean, renewable power, and they want cheap power. And that means that a developer has to be very smart when they develop a project. Starting from picking a site all the way through development.
This project site is fully permitted and analyzed, and the county has approved it for development. An independent power producer has almost a laser-sharp focus on what it has to accomplish. It has to get a project done economically and quickly and bring it into the marketplace. It's all risk capital. The risk capital is the stockholders' money, not the ratepayers' money, and they have a much more focused approach to how they develop projects.
Utilities typically aren't project developers, and when they run over budget, the customer pays. It's not enough that you want to do the right thing or know you need to do the right thing, but you better know how to do it right when you're doing it with somebody else's money.
There is an element in utility regulation called the regulatory compact. And this is the deal. The deal with the regulatory compact is utilities are allowed to be a monopoly, the only seller, the only buyer of power. But somebody's looking over your shoulder all the time.
These public utilities have a lot of market power because they are the dominant supplier of electricity to consumers. There is this tendency to try to put things into rates because they earn a rate of return on capital that they raise in the markets and put into plants that they build themselves. Utilities come in and say, we need this much, let's say a 20% rate increase, and we look at it very carefully. And we say, well, maybe 5% is okay, or 8%.
Utilities, if they basically know that they're going to get a guaranteed rate of return, that their capital costs are going to be covered, all of their investment on the generation side are going to be covered, they're just going to do the same thing over and over and over, and there's a huge incentive to pad the costs. I was a regulator for many years. One of the commissioners I worked for had come from private industry, and I was given the job of briefing him on rate of return regulation, which, at the time was pretty much a 15% guaranteed rate of return for utilities. And he kept saying, what? Say that again. What? What? I want to be in that business.
Seems like an absurd example, but it's true. That's the only industry I can think of where when you redecorate the CEO's office, you actually increase earnings to your shareholders. And I tell that people, it's not tongue-in-cheek, it's true, because the CEO's office is part of the facilities necessary to run the company, and they earn a return of and on that investment.
There are people whose job it is to make an argument to these regulatory agencies, these utility commissions, that make it look like the world is going to end if the utility can't build its own project or own its own projects.
The Langley Gulch case before the Idaho Power Commission, summer 2009, that was an incredible eye-opener. Here we were in a regulatory setting where the utilities were supposed to be operating under a regulatory framework. Idaho Power said, no, 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 no. That's not the game we're playing. The game we're playing is we're shoving this through and as quickly and with as little review as possible. And Idaho Power said, there is no time to do any analysis. We have to have Langley Gulch, 251 megawatts, online by the summer of 2012 to keep the lights on.
We had an unprecedented coalition of interveners opposing that project for various reasons. We didn't think it was justified. We didn't think that plant was needed at the size it was or the timing.
We all did analyses and we all came up with the same conclusion. Idaho Power had to jiggle the numbers around, but when you straighten the numbers out, they were going to have plenty of capacity. Here we are now, fast forward. Langley Gulch is constructed and there's no demand for it. They don't need it.
They're going to have an upward pressure on our rates of about 7 to 12%. And it's my view, and view of many of the experts I've talked with, that Langley Gulch is unnecessary today. Our concerns that it was overbuilt, I think, have been borne out.
But then also, they're going to need to go through and just start combing out the independent power producers. The lumber mill that's cogening now, it's not going to get renewed. The small gas-fired facility, it's not going to get renewed. Because big boy Langley Gulch has sat down on the seesaw and knocked everybody up in the air.
I predict 5-10 years from now, we'll have the regulators looking at utilities saying, why'd you spend so much money when you built these power plants? You've overbuilt, such as what's happened in Idaho, and at that stage somebody will wake up again and say, we probably ought to go back to the way it was when we set it up so that IPPs could be competitive, could deliver a product, could meet the need very cost competitively, and take that risk and that burden off the utilities and their ratepayers.
There is no reason, no technical reason, no economic reason, no reason at all that the utility has to be in the generation business. Furthermore, if the utility is controlling how power is collected and transmitted, they can influence the market in ways that are really negative and can affect competition. And so the idea of introducing competition was to keep the utility on its toes, drive prices down, and create innovation.
When you're looking at today's challenge of really changing how we produce energy, the best way to be on your game to do that is to have companies that provide that type of service. They're watching the technology and they're deploying it in lots of different locations. Having a number of parties out there that can do that, do it quickly and stay on top of the game is in our best interest.
It's private companies, these independent power producers or IPPs that come in and say, you know, this is a better mousetrap, it's going to work better, more efficiently, we're going to invest our money to put this on the ground. And then when the utility says we need more power, it's the IPP that walks in the door with that package already bundled up.
wind, farmland, and the Eastern Washington Palouse all go hand in hand.
Wind production that we've seen, the specs on it are all very good.
Avista wants to harvest that clean energy. First Wind will enable it. The independent energy company will raise 58 wind turbines on these farm hills near the towns of Rosalia and Oakesdale. We're told collectively they will produce enough electricity for roughly 30,000 Avista customers. But while generating power, Oakesdale Mayor Dennis Palmer says they will also generate revenue for his small Whitman County town.
The economic impact is going to put, into this area of tax bases, and it's going to help our school districts, our cemetery districts, fire departments.
Avista's contract with First Wind will last for the next 3 decades. Reporting near Rosalia, Aaron Luna, KXLY4 HD News.
Independent power produced projects have to compete with one another. The customer at the end of the day gets the best deal. Because if I fail, it's my investor's money that gets lost. And I can't go back and ask to raise rates so I can recoup those losses.
And that's really the heart of what our industry is about, is providing some discipline to the electric utility industry such that when we flip on the switch, it's not only reliable and it's there when we want it, but it's there at a fair price. That's where the saving grace, if you will, for our electric system is going to come from.